Hello everyone, this is Jennifer Pina. Today I'm going to be presenting Gronlund's Writing Instructional Objectives, the 8th edition. This is by Norman E. Gronlund and Susan M. Brookhart. So as we go through this lesson, I'm going to be talking about basically how they define instructional objectives. I'm going to be giving you an overview of the 3 parts in the book along with the appendices. And then I'm going to be providing a detailed overview of Chapter 8, which is on writing objectives for affective outcomes, and a review of the SWOT. Okay, here we go. So first of all, the definition. This book does not provide just a blanket definition. He kind of is, they're working through a definition as they go through the book. And so I'm going to share a few different concepts that I took away with in light of a definition. First of all, on page 15, they say instructional objectives are the most useful when stated as intended learning outcomes and defined in terms of student performance. So I found this to be really helpful just to understand where they're headed with this. When it comes to writing instructional objectives, they're really looking at this under the lens of intended learning outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish with the learning? But they also want us to think in terms of student performance, which I found very interesting. So they have 2 levels of training that they're going to discuss in the book. One level is called the training level. And this is very specific learning outcomes, limited, and then well-defined tasks. So these are very small, well-defined tasks. So when you're writing an instructional objective at a training level or kind of more of a basic level, they didn't really define training level, but the way that it was applied was really more for either a younger age or a new population to a subject matter where they're really kind of covering the basics. So these need to be specific, they need to be limited, and they need to be well-defined tasks. This is contrast to the higher level learning, which we're going to talk about comprehension, problem solving, and reasoning. So you can kind of see the contrast between the 2 types. When you're thinking about writing learning objectives, you're going to have this training level or higher level learning. Okay, so there's 3 main parts to the book, and then they have several appendix that are packed with information. So I wanted to just go over those a little bit as well. So first of all, the very first part of the book is preparing instructional objectives, which was very helpful to understand where they're headed with this and how to begin thinking about when you're preparing those objectives. Second, writing instructional objectives for various outcomes. So the second section or part is all about writing those objectives. That's the application really of part 1. And then part 3 is using instructional objectives in assessment. So we've learned in this class through so many different books that we've read that assessment is always important. And so in using instructional assessment, using your objectives in assessment is very helpful. And then the appendix. So the appendix is a wealth of resources for this book. So I want to share a little bit about that. All right, so let's get into part 1. So part 1, again, is preparing those instructional objectives. So this is really the first 5 chapters of the book. It covers the focus, the content, and consideration that you want to have when you're writing these instructional objectives. This is really big picture. What do you intend to do with the course? What is the lesson, even course, big picture, or even the lesson? What are your outcomes, depending on where you're writing those outcomes? What do you want to accomplish in focus? What is your focus? What is your content going to be involving? And then what considerations do you have? So that's really the main focal point of part 1. Part 2 is writing the instructional objectives for various outcomes. So this part has 3 main divisions. the cognitive, the affective, and the performance instructional objectives. So this is very familiar to us. This is very normal for some of this content when it comes to writing instructional objectives. What was different for me was this whole section on performance, which I found to be really interesting. Thinking about this not from the lens of Christian education, but even from like nursing or science or math, they're looking at how is a task performed for that type of learning. I think of like biology when you're dissecting a frog, okay? They're going to be observing the performance of that dissection in order to assess a learning outcome, okay? So that is what they mean by that. So the cognitive, affective, and performance are the three main sections within Part 2. Part 3 is using instructional objectives in assessment. So first of all, there's the achievement testing. So the very first, there's 2 chapters there, 11 and 12. Chapter 11 is all about using instructional objectives in assessment for achievement testing, okay? Instructional objectives play a key role in testing of student achievement by describing the types of performance to be measured. This is really, really helpful in thinking about just the organic nature that when we're creating an objective and then we're assessing, maybe we're creating a quiz or a test to determine whether our students have learned what we wanted them to learn. We have this very organic nature between the objectives that we've created and the content within our assessment. And so that was really, really helpful. There's a very linked way that you can almost take your learning objectives and kind of use that content for creating your quiz or test or whatever your assessment measure is going to be, your testing measure is going to be. So that was really helpful. The second chapter within this part is on performance and affective assessment. So they say on page 123, instructional objectives play a key role in assessing performance skills and affective outcomes by describing the relevant aspects to be judged. Again, what I was saying earlier kind of ties in here. So if we've created a instructional objective and we're using that then to gauge what our students have learned, we're going to have this very organic nature where we're using that objective as part of our assessment. The same with performance skills, and affective really could be said as well as cognitive. So that was really helpful for me in that section. All right, so then the appendix. The appendix has 6 different areas that are extremely loaded with content for, I would say, new teachers, but probably all professors or teachers. This is probably, if you're going to buy the book, it's probably worth it based on the appendix because they provide really good information. So there's a checklist for evaluating the final lists of objectives. There's a taxonomy of educational objectives, the revised taxonomy, the depth of knowledge by subject descriptors, illustrative verbs, and answers to the exercises that are throughout the book. So I really found that the content within them at the end is probably material that I will continue to go back to years from now as I'm just working through writing my instructional objectives and being able to kind of utilize the tools for that. Okay, so I want to go a little bit more in depth into chapter 8, which is the affective, writing objectives for affective outcomes. Part of the reason I want to go into this section a little bit more is because the authors were very clear that this can be one of the most complicated and difficult types to both write and assess when it comes to the affective outcomes. So there were a few challenges. First of all, the biggest challenge within this area is that it's more difficult to write and assess them due to the intangible nature of the affective domain, really. So because of that, that can be really, really challenging. When it comes to feelings, emotions, heart, how things are how a student is learning in those areas, and growing in those areas, a lot more difficult to assess than just a performance skill. Can they do, can they dissect a frog? Do they use the right tool when they're doing that? That kind of thing is easier from to have an objective on. So for tips, I really appreciated some of the tips they provide. First of all, using the taxonomy categories to guide objectives. So I teach a 60 to 90-year-old Sunday school class every Sunday, and it's so much fun. It's the greatest, sweetest population of people. And one of the things that I've been doing just to kind of help myself grow in writing learning objectives and writing a syllabus and a lesson plan every week and all this kind of thing is I've been making myself do it, even though nobody's checking it. I'm just doing it on my own so that I can practice the skill. So I pull out some of the taxonomy information a lot. And so I found this tip to be so helpful and also kind of confirmation that I'm on the right track, because I have been using that to kind of help me, okay, what categories are there? And that's what they do. They walk us through in the book this is a book of lists and summaries, okay? It is more of a workbook than it is a textbook or anything like that. And so one of the things they do is they provide a whole list of some of the different taxonomy areas, and then questions or thoughts to help you provoke you to write your learning objectives underneath it, okay? So it's very, very helpful in that sense. So as I said, that was something that for me is almost like confirmation. Okay, you're on the right track. But using those categories can really help you develop really a robust and thorough area, so you're not just kind of honing in on one area. It can help you tackle both the training level and the higher learning level. And so it's a really helpful tool. The second tip they share is writing in terms of observable behavior when possible. This kind of links back to the intangible nature of affective domain, affective outcomes. So when possible, choose an observable behavior, but it won't always be possible. And they're really clear about that in the book. It won't always be possible to necessarily have a observable one, but when you can, try to do that, and that can be really helpful. And then finally, combining an affective outcome with a cognitive or performance when possible. This was really, really helpful as well for me, because I was thinking in terms, as I've been working through some of these on my own, just learning, as we all are, I've been very honed in on only one at a time. And so they really developed this idea of combining some of them in a way that's really strategic and can be really helpful for both you as the professor in your final assessments of the student, but also for the students themselves. If you think about how we learn, there's a multi-layered learning going on at all times. And this concept really kind of ties into that. The idea that we're combining them. As we write our learning objectives, we're really almost honoring the complexity within the learning process, understanding that there will be both cognitive and affective taking place at the same time. And so writing an objective where you're blending them is totally fine and actually can be very helpful and strategic at different moments. So I found that to be really, really helpful within the book. Again, they provide a whole bunch of lists that can be really good questions or markers for you as you're writing your learning objectives to go back to and say, okay, here's some thought-provoking ideas. Here's some things that will really help me develop this out in a more thorough and strategic way. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So I really have a lot to say about this for this book. I did not probably say this as much with some of the other ones, but I want to share just a few of the SWOT for this. First of all, strengths. This is a very, very thorough work on objectives. So if you are needing to grow in understanding learning objectives and or brand new to writing them, this is one of those books that you will go back to over and over again. It's a very, very thorough. They have many examples. As I've said already, this book is really a book of lists and summaries. So throughout the whole, it feels more like a workbook in that sense. Like there's a lot of different questions to help you think through when it comes to the different domains, when it comes to the taxonomy and how to write objectives based on each different level within the taxonomy. So very, very thorough, many examples. And it really provides a robust summary of each chapter at the end of each chapter. So there's 12 chapters in the book, and it really does, the authors do a wonderful job. They even do it in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of format, so that you are really getting a very robust summary of what they explained. I found that to be helpful because there are so many lists. When you're reading through it, it feels a little disjointed at times. And so the summary helped kind of ground me back in what they were trying to accomplish with that chapter. Weaknesses. It is very dated. In fact, I had to order it 3 times. I like physical books, and so I was trying to get a physical copy and not a digital. I recommend the digital. I ordered it 3 times and it didn't deliver because it just was hard to get a hold of. The original version of this book was written back in 1991. And then the 8th edition, which is the one I'm presenting, was actually revised in 2009. So for that, I think it may be a little dated, both in approach to some of the ideas, but also just content and subject matter can be a little dated. I also felt like it was really repetitive. One of the opportunities that I'm going to share is using the content in this book to just create a single chapter. It's not a very big book. It's like, I don't know, 140 pages. It's not a very big book. And so I honestly feel like the content within this book could probably be kind of summarized greatly without lists and all the things that they provide, and really created into like one chapter in a bigger textbook on building a lesson plan or syllabus or something like that. So this is just really repetitive, over and over again, some of the same ideas or concepts. It's taking a really simple task, but it is complex in that sense, writing and instructional objectives. And they're really going into this over and over again in a very detailed way. So using this, so that was a weakness. Content, opportunity, as I said, developing it into a single chapter. And then threats, this is just very dated, so maybe out of a touch with more modern approaches, maybe more modern approaches to writing objectives, or even taxonomy approaches, because of the dated nature of the subject. So I really do recommend it. I think this is a book that I will go back to, because I feel like there are just the lists. As I'm learning to write objectives and thinking through some of those different elements when it comes to cognitive, affective, and performance objectives, that is very new to me. So as a brand new person to the subject matter, I think it's very helpful for me to have this resource, to have the list provided, and especially in the appendix, all the different appendix that they provide, many different lists. There's just a list of verbs at the end, which I think is really helpful. So for that reason, I think I'll go back to this book over and over again, but it's not one that I necessarily would recommend fully to you. Definitely don't go through the steps of buying it 3 times like I did. I would definitely recommend it for you. If you're learning just how to write objectives and you're brand new to this, you may download the digital or get the Kindle version so that it's easy for you to just kind of use as a reference point. I definitely recommend going through the summaries. You could probably read the whole book in the summaries, honestly, because it's such a simple and well-developed idea. But I will say, especially with the affective and the performance writing objectives for those, this was so different and new to me, and that I found that to be very helpful. All right, you guys, well, that's all I have for you from this book. I hope that you guys have a wonderful holiday. It's been great being in class with you, and I hope that you guys enjoy this book. If you read it, that you get a lot out of it, use it as a list and a resource. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.